The windswept highlands of western Anatolia bore witness to humanity's earliest experiments in metallurgy, agriculture, and complex social organization long before the name Arzawa would echo through the corridors of ancient palaces. Archaeological excavations at sites like Baker, Sultan, Aphrodisias, and Cura reveal a sophisticated Bronze Age culture that emerged around 2300 BC, characterized by distinctive pottery traditions, advanced metalworking techniques, and settlement patterns that would profoundly influence the region's subsequent development. These early communities established themselves along the fertile river valleys that cut through the Anatolian plateau, particularly the Miandanda and Hermes river systems. The inhabitants constructed multi-room houses with stone foundations and mud brick superstructures, often featuring central hearths and storage areas that suggest both domestic life and craft production occurred within the same spaces. Excavated remains from Basis Sultan Level 13 demonstrate remarkable continuity in architectural traditions, with buildings showing clear planning and standardized construction techniques that indicate centralized authority even in these formative centuries. The material culture of these Protozoan settlements reveals a population increasingly distinct from their contemporaries in central and eastern Anatolia. Pottery assemblages show unique decorative motifs, including geometric patterns and stylized animal forms that would later appear in classical Arzawan artistic traditions. More significantly, the metallurgical evidence points to sophisticated bronze working capabilities with specialized tools, weapons, and ornamental objects that demonstrate both technical skill and access to tin sources, likely through long distance trade networks extending into the Taurus Mountains and beyond. Linguistic evidence, though fragmentary for this early period, suggests the gradual development of what scholars now recognize as the Luan language family. Hieroglyphic inscriptions from later periods combined with comparative analysis of related Anatolian languages indicate that the Proto-Luwian speakers who had become the Arzawans began differentiating their speech patterns from other Indo-European groups in Anatolia during the late 3rd millennium BC. This linguistic evolution paralleled broader cultural changes as communities developed distinct religious practices, social hierarchies, and political structures that set them apart from neighboring populations. The emergence of recognizable Arzawan identity accelerated during the early 2nd millennium BC, driven by increasing contact with Mesopotamian civilizations and the resulting cultural synthesis. Cuneiform tablets from Karnish and other Assyrian merchant colonies in Cappadocia reference Western Anatolian communities engaged in trade relationships that extended far beyond simple commodity exchange. These documents, dating primarily to the 19th and 18th centuries BC, describe complex commercial arrangements involving textiles, metals, and luxury goods that required sophisticated administrative systems and diplomatic protocols. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals significant changes in settlement organization and material culture. Sites like Kasura show expanded fortification systems, larger public buildings, and increased craft specialization that suggests growing political centralization and social stratification. The pottery traditions continue to evolve, incorporating new forms and decorative techniques that reflect both local innovation and foreign influence. Particularly notable are the appearance of wheel-made ceramics and the adoption of new firing techniques that produced higher-quality vessels suitable for both daily use and ceremonial purposes. The Proto-Luwian communities of Western Andia occupied a crucial geographical position that naturally positioned them as intermediaries between the established civilizations of Mesopotamia and the emerging cultures of the Ion world. The region's river valleys provided natural corridors for trade and communication, while its mineral resources, particularly silver deposits in the tourist foothills, attracted merchants and craftsmen from distant lands. This geographic advantage fostered the development of commercial networks that would become fundamental to Opsan prosperity and political influence. Evidence for these early trade relationships comes from multiple sources. Mesopotamian cylinder seals found at Anatolian sites demonstrate direct contact with Babylonian and Assyrian merchants, while the presence of Anatolian goods in Mesopotamian contexts confirms reciprocal exchange. More intriguingly, chemical analysis of bronze artifacts reveals tin sources that could only have been accessed through extensive trade networks, suggesting that Proto-Luwian communities were already participating in the complex commercial systems that connected the ancient Near East. The cultural exchanges facilitated by these trade relationships profoundly influenced Arzawan development. Mesopotamian religious concepts, particularly those related to storm deities and fertility goddesses, appear to have been adapted and integrated into local belief systems. Archaeological evidence from sanctuary sites shows the adoption of certain Mesopotamian ritual practices, including libation ceremonies and votive offerings, though these were modified to suit local traditions and preferences. Similarly, administrative techniques, including early forms of record-keeping and bureaucratic organization, show clear Mesopotamian influence while retaining distinctly Anatolian characteristics. The gradual formation of political structures capable of unifying the scattered Proto-Arzawan communities represents one of the most significant developments of this period. Archaeological evidence suggests that by 1800 BC, several regional centers had emerged as dominant settlements, each controlling surrounding territories and smaller communities. These proto-urban centers, including sites that would later become major Arzawan cities, show evidence of specialized administrative buildings, defensive fortifications, and craft quarters that indicate complex social organization and centralized authority. The process of political consolidation appears to have been gradual and largely peaceful, driven more by economic necessity and mutual benefit than by military conquest. Shared cultural traditions, linguistic similarities, and common commercial interests created natural bonds between communities that facilitated political cooperation. Evidence for this cooperative approach comes from the distribution of similar artifact types across multiple sites, suggesting coordinated production and exchange systems that required political agreements and administrative coordination. Religious practices during this formative period show both continuity with earlier Anatolian traditions and innovation driven by foreign contact. Excavated sanctuaries reveal complex ritual deposits, including animal bones, pottery vessels, and metal objects that suggest elaborate ceremonial practices. The consistent appearance of certain symbolic motifs across different sites indicates shared religious concepts and possibly coordinated religious activities between communities. Particularly significant is the evidence for storm god worship, which would later become central to Arzawan royal ideology and state religion. The development of craft specialization during this period laid important foundations for later Arza and economic and cultural achievements. Archaeological evidence reveals increasing sophistication in multiple industries, including metalworking, textile production, and ceramic manufacture. Specialized workshops have been identified at several sites, complete with tools, raw materials, and finished products that demonstrate both technical skill and organized production systems. The quality and standardization of these products suggest not only local consumption, but also production for trade and export. Textile production in particular appears to have been highly developed, with evidence for both wool and linen processing. Spindle wells, loom weights, and textile tools found at multiple sites indicate widespread cloth production, while chemical analysis of preserved textile fragments reveals sophisticated dyeing techniques using both local and imported materials. This textile industry would later become one of Arzawa's most important economic assets and diplomatic tools. The social structures that emerged during this formative period show increasing complexity and stratification. Burial evidence reveals clear distinctions between different social groups, with elite graves containing imported goods, specialized weapons, and elaborate ornaments that demonstrate both wealth and status. At the same time, the broader population appears to have enjoyed relative prosperity, with most burials containing at least some grave goods and evidence of adequate nutrition and healthcare. Settlement patterns during the late phase of this period reveal the emergence of hierarchical relationships between different communities. Larger centers show evidence of administrative control over surrounding smaller settlements, including standardized weights and measures, coordinated defensive systems, and shared ceremonial practices. This hierarchical organization would provide the political and administrative framework for the later unified Arzawan kingdom. The scattered protozoan communities that had gradually coalesced during the preceding centuries faced mounting external pressures that would ultimately forge them into a unified political entity. Hittite expansion from the north and increasing Mesopotamian commercial influence created both threats and opportunities that demanded coordinated responses beyond the capabilities of individual cities. The solution emerged through a complex process of diplomatic negotiation, strategic marriages, and gradual administrative integration that transformed Western Anatolia's political landscape. The consolidation process began around 1650 BC, when archaeological evidence reveals significant changes in settlement patterns and material culture across the region. Excavations at multiple sites show the simultaneous construction of similar administrative buildings, standardized fortification systems, and coordinated urban planning that could only have resulted from centralized direction. The most compelling evidence comes from Basa Sultan Level 4, where excavators uncovered a massive palace complex featuring administrative archives, ceremonial halls, and residential quarters arranged according to a sophisticated architectural program that appears at contemporary sites throughout Western Anatolia. These administrative centers were connected by an extensive network of roads and communication systems that enabled rapid coordination across the emerging kingdom's territories. Archaeological surveys have identified numerous way stations, storage depots, and signal towers that formed a comprehensive infrastructure supporting both military operations and commercial activities. The road system itself demonstrates remarkable engineering capabilities, with stone-paved sections, drainage systems, and bridges that remained functional for centuries after their construction. The location of Arzawa's primary capital has generated considerable scholarly debate, though mounting evidence points to a major urban center in the fertile Hermus River Valley, possibly near modern-day Manisa or extending toward the Ion coastal plain. Geological surveys in this region have revealed extensive buried structures consistent with a major Bronze Age city. including massive defensive walls, palace complexes, and residential districts that could have housed tens of thousands of inhabitants. The site's strategic position provided control over both inland trade routes and access to maritime commerce, while abundant agricultural resources in the surrounding valley could support a large urban population. Alternative theories place the capital further inland, possibly in the region around modern-day Usak or Afian, where several large Bronze Age sites show evidence of significant administrative and ceremonial activities. These locations would have provided better defensive positions against northern threats while maintaining access to important mineral resources and trade routes. Recent excavations at Koa near Koa have uncovered impressive fortifications and administrative buildings that some scholars argue could represent the Arzawan capital, though the dating remains controversial. The administrative systems developed during this consolidation period demonstrate remarkable sophistication and innovation. Cuneiform tablets discovered at various sites reveal a complex bureaucratic hierarchy with specialized departments responsible for different aspects of governance. The archive from Tarsus includes detailed records of tax collection, military organization, diplomatic correspondence, and judicial proceedings that provide unprecedented insight into Arzawan governmental structures. These documents show that the kingdom was divided into administrative districts, each governed by appointed officials who reported directly to the central authority. Legal codes developed during this period reflect both Mesopotamian influence and distinctly Anatolian traditions. The surviving legal texts written in Luwian using a uniform script address property rights, commercial transactions, criminal offenses, and family law with remarkable detail and consistency. Particularly notable are provisions for women's rights, including property ownership and inheritance, that appear more liberal than contemporary Mesopotamian or Hittite legal traditions. The codes also established standardized weights, measures, and currency systems that facilitated trade throughout the kingdom and with foreign partners. Diplomatic protocols developed during this era enabled Arzawa to navigate the complex international relations of the Late Bronze Age effectively. Surviving correspondence with Egyptian pharaohs, Mesopotamian rulers, and other Anatolian kingdoms reveals sophisticated diplomatic practices, including treaty negotiations, marriage alliances, and commercial agreements. The famous Amarna letters include several communications between Arzawan kings and Egyptian pharaohs that demonstrate the kingdom's recognition as a major regional power capable of independent foreign policy. Military innovations during this period transformed Arzawa from a collection of city-states into a formidable regional power, capable of projecting force across western Anatolia. Archaeological evidence reveals significant advances in metallurgy, particularly the production of bronze weapons and armor, using improved alloy compositions and manufacturing techniques. Weapon caches discovered at various sites include sophisticated spears, swords, and arrowheads that demonstrate both technical skill and standardized production methods, suggesting centralized military supply systems. The development of horse-drawn warfare represents one of Arzawa's most significant military innovations. Excavated remains of horse burials, chariot parts, and associated equipment indicate that Arzawan forces adopted and refined chariot warfare techniques that had proven effective in other regions. Training facilities identified through archaeological survey include circular tracks, obstacle courses, and specialized buildings that housed both horses and equipment. The kingdom's position provided access to excellent horse-breeding territories in the inland valleys, while trade connections ensured access to the specialized knowledge and equipment necessary for effective chariot operations. Fortification systems constructed during this period reveal sophisticated defensive strategies adapted to local geographical conditions. The massive walls at Sardis built during the early consolidation period incorporate multiple defensive lines, sally ports, and integrated water systems that could sustain lengthy sieges. Similar fortifications at other major centers show coordinated defensive planning that suggests kingdom-wide military engineering standards and shared tactical doctrines. Expansion campaigns launched from these secure bases brought much of western Anatolia under direct Arzawan control through a combination of military conquest and diplomatic integration. Campaign records preserved in administrative archives describe coordinated operations involving multiple armies, extensive logistical support, and sophisticated intelligence gathering. The conquest of the Ion coastal regions proceeded systematically, with Arzawan forces establishing fortified positions that controlled key harbors and trade routes while respecting local customs and administrative structures. Naval capabilities developed during these coastal campaigns enabled Arzawa to project power across the eastern Nile and establish commercial relationships with island communities and mainland Greek settlements. Archaeological evidence from coastal sites includes harbor installations, shipyards, and naval equipment that demonstrate significant maritime capabilities. Underwater archaeology has revealed several Bronze Age shipwrecks carrying Arzawan goods, confirming the kingdom's active participation in Mediterranean trade networks. The integration of conquered territories proceeded through carefully designed policies that balanced central control with local autonomy. Administrative documents reveal a flexible system that allowed conquered communities to maintain traditional practices while accepting Asin oversight in military and diplomatic matters. This approach minimized resistance while maximizing economic benefits from expanded territories and populations. Cultural developments during this period of expansion and consolidation created distinctive artistic and architectural traditions that defined classical Arzawan civilization. Palace complexes constructed at major centers feature innovative architectural elements, including column halls, ceremonial courtyards, and integrated water systems that demonstrate both aesthetic sophistication and practical functionality. The palace at Bisa Sultan includes elaborate wall paintings depicting religious ceremonies, hunting scenes, and mythological narratives that provide unique insights into Adawaran cultural values and artistic capabilities. Sculpture workshops identified at multiple sites produced distinctive artistic works that combined Anatolian traditions with influences from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Ion world. Relief carvings on building facades and freestanding sculptures demonstrate sophisticated carving techniques and complex iconographic programs that celebrated royal power, religious devotion, and cultural identity. The famous Aswan Sphinx sculptures discovered at several palace sites show particular artistic innovation in their combination of traditional Near Eastern motifs with distinctly Anatolian stylistic elements. Pottery production during this period achieved new levels of sophistication and standardization. Specialized workshops produced high-quality ceramics for both domestic use and export, with distinctive forms and decorative schemes that became recognized throughout the Eastern Mediterranean as distinctly Arzawan products. Chemical analysis of pottery finds at sites across the region confirms the existence of centralized production centers that supplied standardized goods throughout the kingdom and beyond. Religious practices evolved during this period into complex ceremonial systems that reinforced royal authority while maintaining connections to traditional Anatolian spiritual traditions. Temple complexes constructed at major centers feature elaborate architectural programs designed to accommodate large-scale public ceremonies and private royal rituals. The Great Temple at Ephesus, though later rebuilt multiple times, appears to have originated during this period as a major Arzawan religious center dedicated to the storm god Tarhans and associated deities. Religious art and iconography from this period reveal sophisticated theological concepts that integrated traditional Anatolian nature worship with more abstract divine concepts borrowed from Mesopotamian and Egyptian sources. Seal impressions and relief carvings show complex mythological scenes involving interactions between gods, kings, and natural forces that reflect both political ideology and genuine spiritual beliefs. The development of writing systems during this period enabled more sophisticated recording and cultural expression, while Arso and scribes continue to use ununiform for administrative and diplomatic purposes. Evidence suggests experimentation with hieroglyphic writing systems that may have influenced later Anatolian scripts. Literary texts preserved in palace archives include hymns, historical narratives, and legal precedents that demonstrate growing cultural sophistication and intellectual achievement. Trade networks established during this expansion period connected Arzawa to commercial systems spanning the known world. Archaeological evidence reveals Arzawan goods in contexts ranging from Mycenaean Greece to Mesopotamian cities, while foreign products found at Arzahan sites confirm reciprocal exchange relationships. The kingdom's strategic position enabled it to serve as a crucial intermediary between different cultural and economic zones, generating substantial wealth that funded further expansion and cultural development. Mining operations expanded significantly during this period to meet growing demands for metals, both domestically and for export. Archaeological surveys have identified numerous Bronze Age mining sites in the Taos Mountains and other mineral-rich regions that show evidence of large-scale organized extraction activities. Smelting facilities and metalwork centers processed raw materials into finished goods that supplied both military needs and commercial exports. Agricultural innovations supported the growing urban populations and military forces that characterized this period of expansion. Irrigation systems, terrace farming, and improved crop varieties increased agricultural productivity, while specialized facilities processed and stored surplus production for redistribution. Administrative records detailed complex systems for collecting, storing, and distributing agricultural products that sustained both urban centers and military campaigns. The prosperity and territorial expansion that had characterized Arzawa's golden age began encountering serious challenges as a new power consolidated its control over central Anatolia. The Hittite Empire, emerging from its capital at Hattusa, represented a fundamentally different approach to Anatolian politics than the loose confederations and city-state alliances that had previously dominated the region. Unlike the Arzawans, who had built their kingdom through gradual integration and diplomatic accommodation, the Hittites pursued aggressive military expansion backed by sophisticated administrative systems and an ideology of divine kingship that broke no equals. Initial contact between the two kingdoms occurred through diplomatic channels around 1430 BC, when Hittite envoys arrived at the Arzawan court bearing proposals for commercial agreements and territorial demarcation. Cuneiform tablets discovered in palace archives record these early negotiations, revealing a complex dance of mutual recognition tempered by underlying territorial ambitions. The Hittite king Tidal I approached Arzawa as a potential ally against common enemies, particularly the troublesome Kaska tribes who threatened both kingdoms' northern territories. These diplomatic overtures included offers of marriage alliances, shared military campaigns, and coordinated responses to Egyptian expansion in the Levant. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals significant changes in Arzawan military preparations and defensive strategies. Fortification systems at major centers underwent extensive modifications, with existing walls reinforced and new defensive works constructed according to updated military engineering principles. The fortress complex at Sardis received additional outer walls, improved gate systems, and specialized offensive installations designed to counter siege warfare techniques that had proven effective in Hittite campaigns elsewhere. Similar upgrades appeared simultaneously at other Arzawan strongholds, suggesting coordinated defensive planning in response to perceived Hittite threats. The Azern response to Hittite diplomatic initiatives reflected deep divisions within the kingdom's ruling elite. Administrative documents from this period record heated debates in royal councils between factions advocating accommodation and those demanding resistance to Hittite expansion. The accommodation faction, led by several powerful noble families with extensive commercial interests, argued that cooperation with the Hittites would provide security and economic benefits while preserving Arzawan autonomy. They pointed to successful diplomatic relationships with Egypt and Mesopotamian kingdoms as precedents for managing relations with powerful neighbors without sacrificing independence. Opposition voices, however, warned that Hittite diplomatic overtures masked expansionist ambitions that would ultimately result in Arzawan subjugation. These resistance advocates, often representing military commanders and regional governors from frontier territories, argued that the Hittite administrative system left no room for genuine allied relationships. They cited examples of other Anatolian kingdoms that had accepted Hittite protection only to find themselves reduced to vassal status within a few generations. Archaeological evidence supports their concerns, as excavations at former Hittite ally sites reveal systematic replacement of local administrative systems with Hittite bureaucratic structures. King Tarantu, who ascended to the Arzawan throne around 1420 BC, initially pursued a cautious middle course that sought to maintain diplomatic relations while strengthening military capabilities. His reign began with extensive military reforms that modernized Arzawan forces according to contemporary warfare standards. Infantry units received improved bronze weapons manufactured in centralized armories using standardized designs and quality controls. Chariot forces expanded significantly, with new breeding programs producing larger, more robust horses capable of carrying heavier equipment and armor. Tahunta Radu's military innovations extended beyond equipment to include tactical and organizational reforms that reflected careful study of Hittite military methods. Training facilities constructed during his reign featured specialized areas for different types of combat instruction, including siege warfare, cavalry operations, and coordinated infantry maneuvers. Officer training programs established formal military education systems that produced professional commanders capable of leading complex operations. These reforms transformed the Arzawan military from a collection of regional militias into a unified professional army capable of challenging major powers. Strategic alliance building became a cornerstone of Dunarado's foreign policy as he sought to balance Hittite pressure through diplomatic relationships with other regional powers. Correspondence preserved in palace archives reveals extensive negotiations with Minian Greek kingdoms, Cypriot city-states, and even distant Egyptian territories. These diplomatic initiatives produced several significant agreements, including mutual defense pacts, commercial treaties, and intelligence sharing arrangements that provided Arzawa with crucial information about Hittite military preparations and political developments. The most significant of these alliances involved the Kingdom of Aya, identified by most scholars with Minian Greek territories in the Ayan region. Diplomatic correspondence between Arzawan and Iowan courts reveals sophisticated negotiations that produced military cooperation agreements, shared naval operations, and coordinated responses to Hittite expansion. Archaeological evidence from Ion sites includes Arzawan weapons, pottery, and luxury goods that confirm extensive material exchanges supporting these political relationships. Border tensions escalated significantly around 1400 BC when competing territorial claims in the Siha Riverland created the first serious military confrontations between Arzawan and Hittite forces. The Saha Riverland, encompassing the fertile valleys of northwestern Anatolia, represented crucial strategic territory that controlled access routes between central Anatolia and the Iron Coast. Both kingdoms claimed historical rights to the region based on previous conquests and administrative arrangements, but the area's strategic importance made compromise impossible. Initial skirmishes involved relatively small forces conducting raids and counter-raids, designed to establish territorial control without triggering full-scale warfare. Arzawa forces operating from fortified positions established during earlier expansion campaigns conducted systematic attacks against Hittite settlements and military installations. These operations targeted supply lines, communication networks, and administrative centers rather than engaging in direct confrontations with major Hittite armies. Archaeological evidence from affected sites reveals extensive destruction layers dating to this period with burned buildings, scattered weapons, and hasty repairs indicating the intensity of these border conflicts. Hittite responses demonstrated their superior organizational capabilities and military resources. Rather than matching Arzawa raiding tactics, Hittite commanders launched coordinated campaigns designed to capture and hold strategic positions. Their forces constructed fortified camps at crucial crossroads and river crossings, establishing permanent military presence that gradually restricted Arzawa movement and supply operations. Engineering capabilities enabled Hittite forces to build these installations rapidly using standardized designs and prefabricated components transported from central supply depots. The proxy warfare that characterized much of this conflict involved both kingdoms supporting local allies and client states in contested territories. Arzawa diplomats provided weapons, training, and financial support to tribal groups and minor kingdoms that opposed Hittite expansion, while Hittite agents worked to undermine Arzawa influence through similar means. Archaeological evidence from smaller settlements in contested regions reveals mixed material cultures, reflecting these competing influences with Arzawa and Hittite artifacts appearing in the same contexts as local populations navigated between rival powers. Intelligence operations became increasingly sophisticated as both kingdoms sought advantages through information gathering and political manipulation. A1 records describe extensive spy networks operating in Hittite territory, providing detailed reports on military preparations, political developments, and economic conditions. These intelligence operations required substantial resources and coordination with specially trained agents, secure communication systems, and financial networks supporting operations across enemy territory. Similar Hittite activities in Arzawa lands created an atmosphere of suspicion and security concerns that affected all levels of society. The looser lands encompassing the mountainous regions of southern Anatolia became another major theater of conflict as both kingdoms sought to control these strategically important territories. The Luka peoples, organized into numerous small kingdoms and tribal confederations, possessed significant military capabilities and strategic resources that made them valuable allies. Erewhon efforts to maintain influence in these regions involved complex diplomatic negotiations, military assistance, and commercial agreements that competed directly with similar Hittite initiatives. Military technology developments during this period reflected the intensifying competition between the two kingdoms. Arzawa metalworkers produced increasingly sophisticated weapons and armor with improved alloy compositions, better manufacturing techniques, and innovative designs that provided tactical advantages in specific combat situations. Siege warfare equipment received particular attention with engineers developing specialized catapults, battering rams, and scaling devices designed to overcome improved fortification systems. Archaeological excavations at military production sites reveal extensive workshops, raw material stockpiles, and finished weapon caches that demonstrate the scale of military preparation. Naval warfare emerged as a new dimension of conflict as both kingdoms sought to control maritime trade routes and coastal territories. Arzawa naval forces, building on earlier commercial maritime experience, developed specialized warships capable of conducting military operations against Hittite coastal positions in allied territories. These vessels, larger and more heavily armed than commercial ships, featured reinforced hulls, specialized weapons platforms, and crew accommodations designed for extended military campaigns. Harbor installations at major Arzawa ports received defensive upgrades, including chain barriers, fortified docks, and coastal artillery positions. Internal political pressures intensified as the prolonged conflict strained Arzawa resources and tested national unity. Administrative records reveal growing tensions between different regions and social groups over military service obligations, taxation levels, and resource allocation priorities. Urban populations, particularly merchants and craftsmen dependent on peaceful trade relationships, increasingly questioned military policies that disrupted commercial activities and threatened economic prosperity. Rural communities faced different challenges as military recruitment and agricultural requisitions reduced available labor and resources for farming activities. Religious and ideological dimensions of the conflict became increasingly prominent as both kingdoms sought divine justification for their territorial claims and military actions. Arzawa royal inscriptions from this period emphasized the kingdom's role as defender of traditional Anatolian religious practices against foreign influences, while Hittite propaganda portrayed their expansion as divinely mandated unification of Anatolian peoples under legitimate authority. Temple complexes in both kingdoms received substantial investments in construction and ritual activities designed to demonstrate divine favor and support for royal policies. Diplomatic initiatives continued throughout this period of military conflict, as both sides recognized the costs and risks of prolonged warfare. Negotiation attempts involved complex proposals for territorial division, tribute arrangements, and mutual recognition agreements that might have resolved competing claims without further military action. These diplomatic efforts failed primarily because fundamental disagreements about political organization and territorial sovereignty proved impossible to reconcile through compromise. The Hittite conception of unified imperial authority conflicted irreconcilably with Arzawan traditions of autonomous regional governance and confederated political structures. Economic warfare became an increasingly important aspect of the conflict, as both kingdoms sought to undermine their opponent's resource base and military capabilities. Arzawan efforts to disrupt Hittite trade routes included naval operations against merchant shipping, diplomatic pressure on trading partners, and support for rebellious territories that controlled crucial commercial networks. Hittite responses involved similar economic pressure tactics combined with military operations designed to capture Arzawan commercial centers and productive territories. The prolonged nature of these conflicts gradually transformed both kingdoms' political and social structures. Military demands required expanded administrative systems, increased taxation, and greater central control over regional resources and populations. These changes strengthened royal authority while reducing traditional noble privileges and local autonomy. Archaeological evidence reveals growing standardization in material culture, administrative practices, and settlement organization that reflects increasing centralization driven by military necessities. The death of Silua Ward in 1344 BC created a succession crisis within the Hittite Empire that King Tahuna Radu of Arzawa viewed as an unprecedented opportunity to reverse decades of territorial losses and restore his kingdom as regional dominance. The new Hittite king Masili II faced immediate challenges from multiple directions as rebellious vassals throughout Anatolia and Syria sensed weakness in the imperial center. Kaska tribes launched devastating raids against northern Hittite territories while Egyptian forces pressed their advantage in the Levant. Within this context of imperial crisis, Tarunadu made the fateful decision to break the uneasy peace that had characterized the final years of his predecessor's reign and launch a comprehensive campaign to reclaim Arzawan territories lost during previous conflicts. The catalyst for full-scale war emerged from a complex dispute over succession rights in the Siha Riverland, where a local ruler's death without clear heirs created competing claims that both kingdoms sought to exploit. Arzawan forces moved swiftly to install their preferred candidate, a minor noble with distant family connections to the deceased ruler, but strong ties to Arzawan commercial interests. Simultaneously, Hittite administrators arrived with their own claimant, backed by legal documents asserting imperial authority over succession matters in vassal territories. The resulting confrontation escalated rapidly when Arzawan troops refused to withdraw, leading to the first major battle between regular forces from both kingdoms since the border skirmishes of the previous generation. Archaeological evidence from the Siha River battlefield reveals the scale and intensity of this initial engagement. Weapon fragments scattered across a wide area indicate that both armies deployed their full range of military capabilities, including heavy infantry, chariot forces, and specialized siege equipment. Bronze arrowheads found in concentrated clusters suggest sustained archery exchanges, while damaged chariot components and horse remains indicate significant cavalry involvement. The battlefield archaeology also reveals evidence of systematic looting and destruction following the engagement, with valuable bronze weapons and equipment removed while less portable items were abandoned or deliberately destroyed. Tahunaro's strategic calculations proved initially successful as Hittite forces, stretched thin across multiple theaters, could not immediately respond with overwhelming force to the Arzawan challenge. Intelligence reports preserved in palace archives indicate that Arzawan commanders had accurately assessed Hittite military commitments and timed their offensive to exploit temporary weaknesses in imperial defenses. The Arzawan army that advanced into contested territories was the largest military force the kingdom had ever assembled, incorporating not only regular troops from the kingdom's core territories, but also substantial contingents from allied cities, mercenary companies recruited from throughout the eastern Mediterranean, and specialized units trained specifically for siege warfare against Hittite fortifications. The innovative military tactics employed by Arzawan forces during the opening campaigns demonstrated sophisticated understanding of contemporary warfare principles and careful adaptation to local geographical conditions, rather than attempting direct assaults against heavily fortified Hittite positions. Arzawan commanders implemented a strategy of systematic isolation that targeted supply lines, communication networks, and administrative centers supporting enemy strongholds. Mobile forces equipped with the latest bronze weapons and supported by efficient logistical systems conducted coordinated operations across wide areas, forcing Hittite garrisons to divide their attention between multiple threats while preventing effective coordination between separated units. Siege warfare innovations introduced during these campaigns represented significant advances in military, engineering, and tactical coordination. Arzawan engineers developed portable siege towers constructed from standardized components that could be rapidly assembled at target locations, providing protected platforms for archers and assault troops while enabling more effective attacks against defensive walls. Battering ram designs incorporated bronze-reinforced heads and improved suspension systems that increased striking power while reducing vulnerability to defensive countermeasures. Most significantly, coordinated artillery systems using multiple catapults enabled concentrated bombardments that could breach fortification walls or suppress defensive fire during assault operations. The systematic nature of Arzawan siege operations reflected careful planning and extensive preparation that had been underway for several years before the conflict began. Archaeological excavations at military production centers reveal specialized workshops dedicated to manufacturing siege equipment with standardized designs enabling mass production of interchangeable components. Storage facilities contain stockpiles of prefabricated materials, specialized tools, and finished equipment sufficient to support multiple simultaneous siege operations. Training facilities included full-scale mock-ups of typical Hittite fortifications where assault troops practice coordinated attacks, using actual siege equipment under realistic conditions. Mercial II's initial response to the Arzawan offensive demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of Hittite military organization. The imperial system's emphasis on centralized command and standardized procedures enabled rapid mobilization of substantial forces from distant territories, but the same organizational structure created delays in decision and reduced flexibility in responding to unexpected tactical situations. Hittite forces that eventually confronted the Arzawan advance were well equipped and professionally trained, but their commanders operated under rigid tactical doctrines that proved inadequate against Arzawan innovations and local geographical challenges. The first major confrontation between the full armies of both kingdoms occurred near the strategic city of Apasa, where Hittite forces attempted to relieve a besieged garrison while Arzawan troops sought to complete their conquest of this crucial coastal stronghold. The battle demonstrated the tactical evolution that had occurred in both armies since their previous major engagement, decades earlier. Hittite forces deployed in traditional formations emphasizing heavy infantry supported by chariot units, while Arzawan commanders experimented with more flexible arrangements that integrated different unit types and combined arms formations designed to exploit specific tactical opportunities. Chariot warfare during this engagement revealed significant technological and tactical innovations on both sides. Arzawan chariots featured improved designs with larger wheels, reinforced axles, and enhanced armor protection that enabled more aggressive tactical employment while reducing vulnerability to enemy weapons. Crew training emphasized coordination between driver and warrior that enabled complex maneuvers, including rapid deployment, sustained archery fire, and coordinated charges that could break enemy formations. Hittite chariot forces maintained their traditional emphasis on shock action and individual combat prowess, but their tactical doctrine proved less effective against Arzawan defensive arrangements that included specialized anti-chariot weapons and coordinated infantry support. Infantry combat during the Apasa campaign demonstrated the continuing importance of traditional weapons and tactics, despite technological innovations in other areas. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals extensive use of bronze-tipped spears, reinforced shields, and improved body armor that provided enhanced protection while maintaining mobility necessary for complex battlefield maneuvers. Close combat techniques emphasized formation fighting that required extensive training and discipline, with individual skill less important than unit cohesion and coordinated tactical movements. Medical evidence from skeletal remains indicates that combat injuries were severe and often fatal, with weapons capable of penetrating contemporary armor and causing devastating wounds. The siege of Apasa itself became a testing ground for military engineering innovations as both sides employed increasingly sophisticated techniques to gain tactical advantages. Arzawan siege works included multiple parallel trenches, reinforced artillery positions, and underground tunneling operations designed to undermine defensive walls. Counter-siege measures implemented by the Hittite garrison featured sallyport attacks, defensive artillery, and engineering operations intended to disrupt enemy siege works. The prolonged nature of the siege enabled both sides to experiment with new techniques and equipment, creating an evolutionary process that rapidly advanced siege warfare capabilities. Naval operations during the coastal campaigns introduced maritime warfare as a significant factor in the broad conflict. Arzawan naval forces operating from secure bases in friendly territories conducted systematic attacks against Hittite coastal positions while providing logistical support for land-based operations. These naval units featured specialized warships equipped with bronze-reinforced rams, artillery platforms, and troop transport capabilities that enabled amphibious operations against enemy coastal fortifications. Hittite responses included construction of coastal defense installations, development of their own naval capabilities, and diplomatic efforts to secure allied naval support from other maritime powers. The devastating effectiveness of Arzawa military innovations became apparent as Hittite strongholds throughout western Anatolia fell to systematic siege operations that combined tactical innovation with overwhelming numerical superiority. Archaeological evidence from conquered sites reveals extensive destruction layers, indicating thorough demolition of defensive installations, administrative buildings, and military facilities. Population displacement appears to have been systematic, with entire communities relocated to prevent future resistance while their territories were integrated into Arzawan administrative systems. This systematic approach to conquest reflected careful planning and substantial administrative capabilities that enabled effective occupation and control of captured territories. Intelligence operations played crucial roles in Arzawan military successes during the early phases of the war. Spy networks established during previous decades provided detailed information about Hittite military dispositions, defensive capabilities, and internal political conditions that enabled precise targeting of vulnerable positions. Sabotage operations conducted by trained agents disrupted enemy communications, damaged military equipment, and created confusion that facilitated Arzawan tactical operations. Counterintelligence measures protected Arzawan operational security while identifying and neutralizing Hittite intelligence activities in friendly territories. The psychological impact of early Arzawan victories extended far beyond immediate military consequences as subject populations throughout the Hittite Empire began questioning imperial authority and considering rebellion. Administrative documents from this period record widespread unrest in territories distant from the primary theater of operations, with local officials requesting military reinforcements to maintain order. Some vassal rulers openly defected to the Arzawan cause, providing additional military forces and strategic intelligence while denying resources to the Hittite war effort. These political developments forced MSLE to divert substantial military resources to internal security operations that reduced forces available for operations against Arzawa. Supply and logistics operations supporting the Arzawan offensive demonstrated sophisticated organizational capabilities that enabled sustained military operations across extended distances and time periods. Archaeological evidence from supply depots reveals standardized storage facilities, transportation equipment, and administrative systems that coordinated resource distribution among multiple army units operating in different theaters. Specialized production centers manufactured military equipment, processed food supplies, and maintained weapons and equipment using techniques that maximized efficiency while maintaining quality standards necessary for effective military operations. Medical services supporting Arzawan military operations included field hospitals, trained medical personnel, and specialized equipment for treating combat injuries and maintaining army health during extended campaigns. Skeletal evidence from military cemeteries indicates that wounded soldiers received sophisticated medical care, including surgical procedures, bone setting, and wound treatment that enabled many to survive injuries that would have been fatal without proper medical attention. These medical capabilities not only reduced casualty rates, but also maintained morale by demonstrating royal concern for soldier welfare. Religious and ceremonial activities accompanying military operations reinforced ideological justifications for the war, while maintaining divine favor for Arzawan forces. Army chaplain conducted regular ceremonies honoring traditional deities, particularly the storm god, Tahan, who was believed to provide protection and victory in battle. Ritual deposits found at temporary military camps include offerings of weapons, precious objects, and animal sacrifices that demonstrate systematic religious observances designed to maintain spiritual support for military operations. Victory celebrations following successful engagements featured elaborate ceremonies that honored both divine assistance and human achievements, while reinforcing unit cohesion and fighting spirit. The catastrophic defeat at Aposa marked the beginning of Arzawa's systematic dismemberment as an independent political entity. Mosili II's subsequent campaigns, conducted with methodical precision throughout the remaining years of his reign, transformed the once mighty kingdom into a collection of fragmented territories under direct Hittite administrative control. The process of political dissolution occurred not through a single decisive conquest, but rather through a carefully orchestrated series of military operations, diplomatic manipulations, and administrative reorganizations that systematically eliminated Arzawan resistance while preserving the region's economic productivity and strategic value. The immediate aftermath of military defeat revealed the fundamental weakness of Arzawan political structures when confronted with sustained external pressure. Archaeological evidence from major administrative centers shows hasty abandonment of palace complexes, with valuable archives buried or scattered and administrative equipment destroyed to prevent capture by advancing Hittite forces. The royal court's evacuation from the capital created a power vacuum that regional governors and military commanders attempted to fill through improvised arrangements that lacked central coordination or unified strategic direction. These localized responses, while demonstrating individual initiative and loyalty, proved inadequate against Hittite forces operating according to comprehensive imperial strategies developed through decades of successful expansion campaigns. Hittite administrative policies implemented in conquered Arzawa territories reflected sophisticated understanding of regional political dynamics and economic structures, rather than imposing uniform imperial governance that might provoke continued resistance. Hittite administrators adapted their control mechanisms to local conditions while ensuring effective extraction of resources and prevention of future rebellions. The resulting system of indirect rule preserved existing social hierarchies and cultural practices where they served imperial interests while systematically eliminating political institutions and military capabilities that might support independence movements. The creation of Miralaya as a distinct administrative entity exemplified Hittite strategies for managing conquered territories through controlled fragmentation. This new political unit encompassed the fertile river valleys of central western Anatolia, including territories that had formed the economic heartland of the former Arzawan kingdom. Hittite administrators appointed Mashua, a member of the Arzawan royal family, who had demonstrated loyalty during the final campaigns as ruler of this truncated domain. His appointment represented a calculated decision to provide legitimacy for the new arrangement while ensuring absolute dependence on Hittite support for maintaining authority. The treaty establishing Miralia's subordinate status, preserved in cuneiform tablets from Hittite archives, reveals the comprehensive nature of imperial control mechanisms imposed on former Arzawan territories. Mashria's authority extended only to internal administrative matters and local judicial proceedings, while military affairs, foreign relations, and major economic decisions remained under direct Hittite supervision. Annual tribute obligations included substantial quantities of silver, textiles, livestock, and manufactured goods that represented systematic extraction of regional wealth for imperial purposes. Military service requirements obligated Miralaya to provide troops for Hittite campaigns while prohibiting maintenance of independent military forces capable of challenging imperial authority. Archaeological evidence from Miracuya as administrative centers revealed significant changes in material culture and settlement organization following the imposition of Hittite control. Palace complexes underwent systematic modifications that eliminated defensive capabilities while enhancing ceremonial and administrative functions appropriate for a vassal ruler. Fortification walls were dismantled or reduced to symbolic remnants, while new construction emphasized residential and storage facilities that supported tribute collection and imperial administration. Artifact assemblages show increasing standardization according to Hittite imperial norms, with local craft traditions gradually replaced by imperial styles and techniques that reflected cultural integration policies. The establishment of Hapala as another vassal entity demonstrated Hittite flexibility in adapting administrative arrangements to diverse geographical and cultural conditions. This mountainous region, encompassing the rugged territories of south-central Anatolia, had maintained semi-autonomous status even during Arzawa's imperial expansion due to difficult terrain and fierce local resistance to outside control. Hittite administrators recognized that effective governance of these territories required accommodation with traditional tribal structures and customary practices that had proven resistant to previous unification efforts. Hapala's ruler, appointed from among local noble families with established authority and popular support, received greater autonomy in internal affairs than his counterpart in Miracuya, but remained subject to the same fundamental restrictions on military and diplomatic activities. The treaty arrangements governing this relationship acknowledged traditional hunting and grazing rights, customary legal procedures, and religious practices that distinguished mountain communities from their land neighbors. These concessions reflected pragmatic recognition that excessive interference with established customs might provoke rebellions that would require costly military interventions to suppress. The Siha Riverland, scene of the initial confrontations that had precipitated the Great War, received special attention in Hittite administrative reorganization due to its strategic importance for controlling access routes between central Anatolia and the Ion Coast. This region's complex political geography, featuring numerous small communities with diverse ethnic backgrounds and conflicting territorial claims, required sophisticated administrative solutions that balance competing interests while ensuring effective imperial control. Hittite administrators implemented a system of multiple overlapping jurisdictions that prevented any single local authority from accumulating sufficient power to challenge imperial oversight. The appointment of vassal rulers in the Siha Riverland involved careful selection of individuals who possessed sufficient local credibility to maintain order while lacking independent power bases that might support future rebellions. These administrators, typically drawn from minor noble families with limited territorial holdings, received their authority directly from Hittite imperial officials and remained dependent on imperial support for maintaining their positions. Their administrative responsibilities focused primarily on tribute collection, population registration, and maintenance of transportation infrastructure that supported imperial communication and military movements. Economic reorganization throughout the former Arzawan territories proceeded according to systematic policies designed to integrate regional resources into the broader Hittite imperial economy while preventing the accumulation of wealth and military capabilities that might support independence movements. Traditional craft production centers underwent significant modifications as imperial administrators imposed new quality standards, production quotas, and distribution arrangements that served imperial rather than local interests. Textile manufacturing, which had been one of Arzawa's most profitable export industries, was systematically reorganized to supply imperial courts and military forces while reducing production of luxury goods for independent commercial networks. Mining operations in the mineral-rich regions of the Taos Mountains received particular attention from Hittite administrators who recognized the strategic importance of controlling metal production for maintaining military superiority throughout Anatolia. Archaeological evidence from mining sites reveals extensive modifications to extraction and processing facilities with new equipment, expanded workforce housing, and improved transportation systems that increased production while ensuring imperial control over valuable resources. Specialized administrative personnel supervised all aspects of mining operations, from workforce recruitment and training to final distribution of processed metals to imperial armories and commercial networks. Agricultural reorganization emphasized increased production of specific crops that served imperial needs while reducing regional self-sufficiency that might support future rebellions. Large estates producing grain, olives, and wine for imperial consumption replaced smaller farms that had provided diverse crops for local communities. This transformation required substantial population relocations as traditional farming communities were disrupted and reformed according to imperial agricultural policies. Administrative documents record systematic programs for redistributing landholdings, relocating populations, and establishing new settlement patterns that maximized agricultural productivity while minimizing political autonomy. The tribute system imposed on vassal territories represented one of the most sophisticated aspects of Hittite imperial administration, combining systematic resource extraction with political control mechanisms that reinforced imperial authority while providing incentives for local cooperation. Annual tribute obligations varied according to regional capabilities and strategic importance, with wealthy agricultural areas providing larger quantities of goods while mountainous regions contributed specialized products like metals, timber, and livestock. The collection process involved detailed inventories, quality inspections, and transportation arrangements that required extensive coordination between local administrators and imperial officials. Tribute goods included not only raw materials and agricultural products, but also manufactured items that demonstrated local craft capabilities and cultural achievements. Textiles featuring distinctive regional designs, metalwork showcasing local techniques, and pottery representing traditional artistic styles served both economic and political functions by providing valuable goods for imperial use while preserving cultural elements that maintained local identity within the imperial framework. This approach reflected sophisticated understanding of the relationship between cultural preservation and political stability in diverse imperial territories. The integration of Arzawan military traditions into Hittite imperial forces proceeded through carefully managed programs that utilized regional military expertise while eliminating independent military capabilities. Former Arzawan military commanders who demonstrated loyalty during the transition period received appointments in imperial forces, often serving in campaigns distant from their home territories, where their knowledge of local conditions could not support rebellions. Specialized military units incorporating traditional Arzawan weapons and tactics were integrated into imperial armies, providing valuable capabilities while ensuring that regional military knowledge served imperial rather than local interests. Recruitment policies for imperial military service emphasized individual advancement opportunities that attracted young men from former Aran territories while weakening traditional community structures. Military careers offered social mobility, economic advancement, and geographic mobility that appealed to ambitious individuals while removing potential leaders from local communities, where they might organize resistance movements. Training programs conducted at imperial military centers exposed recruits to Hittite culture and values while providing professional skills that created personal investment in imperial success. Cultural adaptation under Hittite rule revealed complex processes of accommodation and resistance that varied significantly across different social groups and geographical regions. Elite families who had held positions in the former Arzawan administration often embraced Hittite cultural practices as strategies for maintaining social status and accessing new opportunities within the imperial system. Archaeological evidence from elite residences shows adoption of Hittite architectural styles, decorative arts, and material culture that demonstrated cultural assimilation while preserving selected elements of traditional Arzawan identity. Religious practices underwent significant modifications as Hittite administrators promoted imperial religious observances while tolerating traditional local practices that did not conflict with imperial ideology. Temple complexes received new dedications to Hittite deities while maintaining shrines to traditional also gods who were reinterpreted as regional manifestations of imperial divine powers. Ritual practices incorporated Hittite ceremonial elements while preserving traditional seasonal celebrations and community observances that maintained cultural continuity within the new political framework. The preservation of Louisian language and cultural traditions occurred through complex processes of adaptation that enabled cultural survival within imperial political structures. Administrative documents reveal continued use of Louisian for local legal proceedings, commercial transactions, and religious observances, while Hittite became the required language for official communications with imperial authorities. Educational systems developed bilingual capabilities that enabled local populations to function effectively within imperial administrative structures while maintaining cultural connections to traditional practices and beliefs. Literary traditions adapted to imperial conditions through the development of new narrative forms that incorporated Hittite historical perspectives while preserving traditional Arzawan cultural values and historical memories. Epic poems and historical narratives celebrated traditional heroes and cultural achievements while acknowledging the legitimate authority of Hittite rulers and the benefits of imperial membership. These literary adaptations served important functions in maintaining cultural identity while preventing the development of historical narratives that might support independence movements. Craft traditions demonstrated remarkable resilience through adaptive strategies that preserved traditional techniques and artistic styles while serving new markets and patrons within the imperial system. Pottery production maintained distinctive regional characteristics while incorporating imperial decorative elements that appealed to broader markets. Metalwork traditions adapted traditional techniques to produce weapons and tools according to imperial specifications while preserving specialized knowledge that distinguished regional craftsmen. Textile production preserved traditional designs and techniques while adapting to new raw materials and quality standards imposed by imperial administrators. The carefully constructed imperial system that had governed Western Anatolia for over a century began showing signs of terminal strain by the early 13th century BC. Administrative documents from Hittite archives reveal mounting difficulties in maintaining effective control over distant territories as the empire's resources became increasingly stretched across multiple theaters of operation. Tribute collections from vassal territories declined significantly with reports of crop failures, population displacement, and local unrest creating cascading problems throughout the imperial administrative network. Archaeological evidence from major centers shows reduced construction activity, deferred maintenance of public buildings, and simplified material culture that suggests declining prosperity and administrative capacity. The first reports of strange maritime raiders appeared in Hittite intelligence documents around 1210 BC describing coordinated attacks against coastal settlements throughout the eastern Mediterranean. These initial accounts, preserved in fragmentary ununiform tablets from imperial archives, describe seaborne forces of unprecedented size, an organization conducting systematic raids against established trading centers and administrative installations. Unlike traditional piracy, which typically involved small-scale opportunistic attacks, these operations demonstrated sophisticated planning, extensive logistical support, and military capabilities that enabled sustained campaigns against well-defended targets. The raiders' ethnic composition and origins remained mysterious too. Contemporary observers who refer to them collectively as sea peoples while acknowledging their diverse cultural backgrounds and varying tactical approaches. Archaeological evidence from destroyed coastal sites reveals weapon types and pottery styles that suggest origins throughout the Ion world, including regions that had maintained commercial and diplomatic relationships with both Hittite and former Arzawan territories. The scale of destruction at these sites indicates forces far larger than typical raiding parties, with evidence of systematic demolition, population evacuation, and resource extraction that suggests organized military campaigns rather than spontaneous violence. Coastal settlements throughout western Anatolia faced immediate threats as sea peoples' fleets appeared offshore, conducting reconnaissance operations that preceded major assault landings. The fortified harbor at Milawada, which had served as a crucial link between Hittite territories and Ion commercial networks, suffered devastating attacks that destroyed port facilities, warehouse complexes, and administrative buildings. Archaeological excavations reveal thick destruction layers containing burned timber, clapstone walls, and scattered artifacts that indicate rapid abandonment, followed by systematic looting. The harbor's strategic importance made its loss particularly damaging to imperial communications and supply networks that depended on maritime transportation. The response of local Hittite administrators to these maritime threats revealed fundamental weaknesses in imperial defensive capabilities. Coastal fortifications had been designed primarily to control local populations and deter small-scale raids rather than repel major amphibious assaults. Conducted by well-equipped professional forces, many defensive installations lacked adequate artillery, had insufficient garrison forces, and possessed limited supplies for sustaining prolonged sieges. Communication systems that connected coastal positions to interior administrative centers proved inadequate for coordinating rapid responses to multiple simultaneous threats across extended geographical areas. Mashulua of Myra Kawalia found his truncated domain facing unprecedented challenges as Sea People's forces penetrated inland river valleys that had previously provided security from maritime threats. His limited military resources, constrained by treaty obligations that prohibited maintaining substantial armed forces, proved completely inadequate for defending the extensive territories under his nominal control. Administrative correspondence from this period reveals desperate requests for imperial military assistance combined with increasingly urgent reports of population displacement, agricultural disruption, and administrative breakdown as traditional governance structures collapsed under external pressure. The systematic nature of Sea People's operations became apparent as their forces demonstrated detailed knowledge of local geography, political structures, and economic resources that enabled precisely targeted attacks against crucial infrastructure. Rather than conducting random destructive raids, these forces systematically eliminated administrative centers, destroyed communication networks, and captured strategic positions that controlled transportation routes and resource production. This operational sophistication suggested extensive intelligence gathering and careful planning that required substantial organizational capabilities and long-term strategic thinking. Archaeological evidence from inland sites reveals that Sea People as forces adapted their tactics effectively to different geographical and defensive conditions encountered as they moved away from coastal areas. River valley settlements faced coordinated attacks that combined waterborne assault forces with land-based units that surrounded defensive positions and prevented organized resistance. Mountain communities encountered specialized forces equipped for operations in difficult terrain with evidence of systematic destruction of defensive installations and storage facilities that eliminated local resistance capabilities while preserving valuable resources for extraction. The collapse of established trade networks created cascading economic disruptions that affected communities throughout western Anatolia, regardless of their direct exposure to Sea People as attacks. Commercial centers that had depended on predictable transportation routes and secure storage facilities found themselves unable to maintain normal business operations as traditional partners disappeared and established supply chains disintegrated. Archaeological evidence from trading posts and warehouse complexes shows hasty abandonment with valuable goods left behind and facilities destroyed to prevent their use by hostile forces. Happil's mountainous territories initially provided some protection against the maritime raiders, but the kingdom's dependence on land trading partners for essential goods created vulnerabilities that became apparent as established commercial relationships collapsed. The ruler's attempts to maintain traditional tribute obligations to Hittite authorities became increasingly difficult as the economic foundation supporting these payments disintegrated. Administrative documents record growing tensions between imperial demands for continued tribute and local populations, facing severe hardships due to disrupted trade relationships and refugee influxes from affected coastal areas. Population movements triggered by Sea People's activities created humanitarian crises throughout western Anatolia as established communities struggled to accommodate displaced populations while maintaining their own survival. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites shows rapid expansion of residential areas, often constructed using improvised building techniques and inferior materials, that suggest emergency accommodation for refugee populations. Cemetery evidence reveals increased mortality rates, malnutrition indicators, and trauma injuries that demonstrate the severe hardships faced by displaced communities during this period of upheaval. The breakdown of imperial administrative systems created opportunities for local leaders to assert greater autonomy while simultaneously exposing their territories to external threats without imperial protection. Some regional commanders attempted to organize independent defensive arrangements, pooling resources from multiple communities to create ad hoc military forces capable of limited resistance against Sea People's incursions. These improvised arrangements achieved occasional tactical successes, but lacked the resources and coordination necessary for effective strategic defense against well-organized enemy forces. Traditional Arzawan political structures, which had been suppressed but not entirely eliminated during the period of Hittite domination, began re-emerging as imperial control weakened and local communities sought familiar organizational frameworks for addressing unprecedented challenges. Archaeological evidence suggests that some communities attempted to restore pre-conquest administrative practices, religious observances, and social hierarchies that had provided stability and identity during earlier periods of independence. These restoration efforts face significant obstacles due to generational changes, cultural adaptations, and practical difficulties in reconstructing complex institutional arrangements after decades of imperial rule. The restoration attempts revealed the extent to which traditional Adhawan institutions had been transformed during the period of vassalage. Administrative practices had been modified to accommodate imperial requirements, military traditions had been adapted to serve imperial rather than local interests, and economic systems had been restructured to support tribute obligations and imperial commercial networks. Religious practices had incorporated Hittite elements, while traditional ceremonies had been modified to acknowledge imperial authority. These adaptations meant that restoration efforts often produced hybrid institutions that combined traditional elements with imperial innovations in ways that reflected the complex cultural changes of the vassalage period. Military capabilities available to communities attempting to restore independence remained severely limited by the systematic dismantling of traditional defense systems during the imperial period. Weapon stockpiles had been confiscated or redistributed. Fortification systems had been dismantled or neglected, and military training programs had been eliminated or redirected to serve imperial purposes. The few military commanders who retained knowledge of traditional Arzawan tactical doctrines were often elderly men whose experience dated to the pre-conquest period, creating significant gaps in military leadership and institutional knowledge necessary for effective resistance. The Sea People's impact on urban centers throughout western Anatolia varied significantly depending on defensive capabilities, geographical position, and strategic importance. Major administrative centers that had served as focal points for imperial control faced systematic attacks designed to eliminate their capacity for coordinating regional resistance. Archaeological evidence from these sites reveals extensive destruction of palace complexes, administrative buildings, and storage facilities, often accompanied by evidence of systematic looting that removed valuable materials while destroying records and equipment that might support future administrative activities. Smaller settlements often faced different treatment from Sea People's forces, with some communities apparently reaching accommodation arrangements that preserved local populations in exchange for cooperation or tribute payments. Archaeological evidence from these sites shows less extensive destruction, with residential areas often remaining intact while administrative and defensive installations were systematically eliminated. This selective destruction pattern suggests that Sea People's forces distinguished between different types of targets based on strategic considerations rather than pursuing indiscriminate destruction. The collapse of centralized religious institutions created spiritual crises that compounded the practical difficulties faced by communities throughout the region. Temple complexes that had served as centers for community identity and social organization suffered systematic destruction, with religious artifacts scattered or removed, and priestly hierarchies disrupted or eliminated. The loss of traditional religious frameworks left communities without familiar sources of spiritual guidance and social cohesion during periods of unprecedented stress and uncertainty. Attempts to maintain religious continuity under these difficult conditions reveal remarkable resilience and adaptability in local communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that religious observances continued in improvised settings, with traditional ceremonies adapted to available resources and modified to address contemporary concerns about survival and community protection. Votive deposits from this period show simplified offerings and modified ritual practices that preserved essential spiritual elements while acknowledging practical constraints imposed by disrupted social and economic conditions. The breakdown of established legal and judicial systems created additional challenges for communities attempting to maintain social order during periods of crisis and displacement. Traditional legal authorities had often been eliminated or displaced, while established precedents and procedures proved inadequate for addressing unprecedented situations involving displaced populations, resource shortages, and external threats. Archaeological evidence suggests that some communities developed improvised legal arrangements that combined traditional practices with emergency measures designed to address immediate survival needs. Economic adaptation to the collapse of established systems required fundamental changes in production, distribution, and consumption patterns throughout Western Anatolia. Communities that had specialized in particular crafts or agricultural products for trade in imperial markets found themselves forced to develop more diverse economic bases capable of supporting local self-sufficiency. Archaeological evidence reveals increased household-level production of basic necessities, simplified craft techniques that required fewer specialized materials, and modified agricultural practices that emphasized subsistence rather than commercial production. The preservation of cultural knowledge and technical skills during this period of disruption required conscious efforts by community members who recognized the importance of maintaining traditional capabilities despite immediate pressures for survival. Archaeological evidence suggests that some craft specialists continue practicing traditional techniques despite reduced demand and limited access to raw materials. Educational activities continued in modified forms, with knowledge transmission occurring through informal arrangements that preserved essential cultural elements while adapting to changed circumstances. The final collapse of centralized authority in Western Anatolia around 1180 BC did not result in complete abandonment of the region, but rather initiated a prolonged period of political fragmentation and cultural adaptation that scholars have termed the Anatolian Dark Age. Archaeological investigations at sites throughout the former Arzawan territories reveal a complex pattern of continuity and transformation as surviving communities developed new organizational structures while maintaining essential elements of their cultural identity. The material evidence from this poorly documented period demonstrates that while the grand political structures of the Late Bronze Age had indeed collapsed, the underlying population remained and gradually evolved. New forms of social and economic organization adapted to changed circumstances. Excavations at Bassa Sultan reveal significant changes in settlement organization following the destruction layers associated with the Sea People's period. The massive palace complex that had dominated the site during the Late Bronze Age was never rebuilt, but Archaeological evidence shows continued occupation in modified residential areas, constructed using salvage materials from the destroyed administrative buildings. The new settlement pattern featured smaller, more defensible structures arranged around central courtyards that provided security while maintaining community cohesion. Pottery assemblages from these levels show clear continuity with earlier traditions while incorporating simplified production techniques that required fewer specialized resources and less centralized organization. Similar patterns of adaptive reoccupation appear at sites throughout the Hermes and Mondonda river valleys where communities established themselves in easily defended positions that provided access to agricultural land and water sources while offering protection against potential raiders. The hilltop settlement at Sardis shows evidence of continuous occupation throughout the transition period, though on a much reduced scale compared to its late Bronze Age prominence. Residential structures from the early Dark Age levels demonstrate sophisticated understanding of defensive architecture with thick walls, limited access points, and integrated storage facilities that enabled communities to withstand brief sieges while maintaining normal domestic activities. The survival and evolution of Lujansk-speaking communities throughout Western Anatolia provides crucial evidence for cultural continuity during this period of political disruption. Hieroglyphic Luwian inscriptions from sites like Karati and other locations in southern Anatolia demonstrate that the language not only survived the collapse but continued to develop and evolve during the Dark Age centuries. These inscriptions, though often brief and formulaic, preserve traditional royal titles, religious terminology, and administrative vocabulary that connects directly to earlier Arzawan political and cultural traditions. The continued use of Luwian in monumental contexts suggests that local elites maintained awareness of their cultural heritage while adapting to changed political circumstances. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements reveals the development of new agricultural strategies designed to maximize local self-sufficiency while minimizing dependence on external trade networks. Excavated farmsteads from this period show expanded storage facilities, diversified crop production, and integrated craft activities that enabled individual households to meet most of their material needs through local resources. Archaeobotanical analysis reveals increased cultivation of hardy grains like barley and wheat that provided reliable harvests even under adverse conditions, while reduced evidence for luxury crops suggests adaptation to more restricted economic circumstances. The transformation of craft production during the Dark Age reflects broader changes in economic organization and social structure throughout the region. Specialized workshops that had produced goods for elite consumption and longue distance trade were replaced by household-level production that emphasized practical items needed for daily life. Pottery production shows particular adaptation with simplified forms and decorative schemes that maintained aesthetic appeal while requiring less specialized knowledge and fewer exotic materials. Metalworking continued but focused primarily on essential tools and weapons rather than luxury items with bronze working techniques. Adapted to use locally available materials and simplified production methods. Local political organizations that emerged during the Dark Age demonstrate remarkable innovation in developing governance structures suited to the reduced scale and resources of post-collapse communities. Archaeological evidence from several sites suggests the development of council-based decision systems that distributed authority among multiple community leaders rather than concentrating power in individual rulers. Meeting places identified at sites like Aphrodisias feature circular or semicircular arrangements of stone seating that could accommodate community assemblies, while the absence of elaborate throne rooms or audience halls suggest more egalitarian political arrangements than had characterized the late Bronze Age kingdoms. The evolution of defensive strategies during this period reveals sophisticated adaptation to the changed security environment created by the collapse of imperial protection systems. Communities developed coordinated warning systems using hilltop signal stations that could rapidly communicate threats across extended areas, enabling coordinated responses despite the absence of centralized military organization. Archaeological surveys have identified networks of small fortified positions that controlled key mountain passes and river crossings, suggesting systematic defensive planning that required cooperation between multiple independent communities. Religious practices during the Dark Age show both continuity with traditional Arzawan beliefs and adaptation to changed social and economic circumstances. Sanctuary sites throughout the region continued to receive votive offerings and ritual deposits, though these were generally simpler and less valuable than those from the late Bronze Age. The persistence of traditional religious sites suggests that communities maintained connection to ancestral spiritual traditions while adapting ceremonial practices to prevail the resources. Rocket reliefs and simple stone monuments from this period preserve traditional iconographic elements, including storm god imagery and fertility symbols that connected Dark Age communities to their cultural heritage. The challenge of reconstructing political and social developments during this period stems primarily from the dramatic reduction in written documentation compared to the abundant archives of the late Bronze Age kingdoms. The collapse of centralized administrative systems has eliminated the systematic record-keeping that provides detailed information about earlier periods, while the simplified material culture of Dark Age communities produced fewer inscribed objects and monumental texts. Archaeological evidence, therefore, becomes the primary source for understanding this period, requiring careful analysis of settlement patterns, artifact distributions, and architectural remains to reconstruct social and political developments. Trade relationships during the early Dark Age operated on a much reduced scale compared to the extensive commercial networks of the Late Bronze Age, but archaeological evidence demonstrates that exchange relationships continue to connect communities across Western Anatolia and beyond. Obsidian analysis reveals continued exploitation of traditional source areas in central Anatolia, while chemical characterization of metal artifacts shows that copper and tin continue to reach Western Anatolian communities through exchange networks that may have operated through multiple small-scale transactions rather than the organized commercial systems of earlier periods. The gradual recovery of more extensive trade connections becomes archaeologically visible around 100 BC. When artifact assemblages begin showing increased quantities of imported materials and more sophisticated manufacturing techniques, pottery styles from this period demonstrate renewed contact with iron communities, while metalwork shows improved quality and more complex forms that suggest access to better raw materials and technical knowledge. This recovery appears to have proceeded gradually and unevenly, with some communities establishing successful exchange relationships, while others remained largely isolated and self-sufficient. Settlement patterns that developed during the later Dark Age period established foundations for subsequent historical developments in Western Anatolia. The preference for defensible hilltop positions that had characterized the immediate post-collapse period gradually gave way to more accessible locations that facilitated trade and communication. Archaeological surveys revealed the establishment of new settlements along traditional trade routes, particularly in river valleys that provided both agricultural potential and transportation access. These settlement choices reflect growing confidence in regional security and renewed interest in participating in broader economic networks. The emergence of regional centers during the later Dark Age period demonstrates the gradual reconcentration of political and economic authority that would eventually lead to the formation of new kingdoms in Western Anatolia. Sites like Sardis show evidence of expanding settlement areas, improved fortifications, and increased craft production that suggests growing importance as regional focal points. Archaeological evidence indicates that these emerging centers attracted populations from smaller settlements, creating concentrations of people and resources that provided foundations for more complex political organizations. Technological developments during the Dark Age period revealed both continuity with Bronze Age traditions and innovation driven by changed circumstances and resource availability. The transition to iron technology occurred gradually throughout Western Anatolia, with iron objects appearing alongside traditional bronze implements in archaeological contexts from around 1100 BC. Early iron working appears to have developed independently in multiple locations, with local smiths experimenting with techniques for working the new metal while maintaining traditional bronze working capabilities for items where iron was unsuitable. The quality of iron production improved significantly during the later Dark Age period, with archaeological evidence showing increasingly sophisticated forging techniques and better understanding of heat treatment processes that produce superior weapons and tools. Iron required different raw materials and techniques than bronze production, leading to changes in trade relationships and craft organization that contributed to broader economic and social transformations. The superior performance of iron weapons and tools provided advantages that encouraged rapid adoption once technical problems were resolved. Cultural memory and historical consciousness during the Dark Age period preserved important elements of Arzawan identity while adapting to changed circumstances. Oral traditions that maintained knowledge of past glory and cultural achievements provided continuity across generations that lacked written historical records. Archaeological evidence suggests that some communities preserved traditional ceremonies and festivals that commemorated historical events and cultural heroes, maintaining connection to their heritage while developing new traditions suited to contemporary conditions. The gradual development of new artistic traditions during the later Dark Age period demonstrates the creative adaptation of traditional cultural elements to contemporary circumstances and available resources. Pottery decoration shows evolution from simplified geometric patterns toward more complex designs that incorporated traditional motifs while developing new stylistic elements. Metalwork and other crafts show similar patterns of innovation within traditional frameworks, suggesting that craftsmen maintained awareness of historical traditions while developing new techniques and styles suited to changed conditions. Regional variations in Dark Age development reflect the diverse geographical and cultural conditions throughout Western Anatolia, with different areas following distinct trajectories based on local resources, security situations, and cultural preferences. Coastal areas that had suffered severe damage during the CS period showed slower recovery than inland regions that had experienced less disruption. Mountain communities maintained more traditional lifestyles and political arrangements. while river valley settlements showed greater innovation and adaptation to new economic opportunities. The foundation for subsequent historical developments in Western Anatolia was established during the later centuries of the Dark Age as communities developed new institutions, technologies, and cultural practices that would influence the region's development for centuries to come. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that by 900 BC, Western Anatolia had developed new forms of political organization, economic systems, and cultural expression that built upon traditional foundations, while incorporating innovations developed during the challenging centuries following the Bronze Age collapse. The gradual stabilization of Western Anatolia during the final centuries of the Dark Age created conditions favorable for the emergence of new political entities that would fundamentally reshape the region's cultural and political landscape. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout the former Arzawan territories reveals increasing prosperity, expanded settlement patterns, and renewed long-distance trade connections that provided the foundation for more ambitious political projects. The most significant of these developments occurred in the fertile valleys around Sardis, where a dynasty claiming descent from Heraclid lineages began consolidating control over surrounding territories through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic alliances, and economic integration that would eventually create the Lydian kingdom. The rise of Lydian power proceeded through systematic expansion that incorporated former Arzawan territories into a new imperial structure fundamentally different from either the Bronze Age kingdoms or the fragmented political arrangements of the Dark Age period. Lydian rulers developed administrative systems that combined traditional Anatolian governance practices with innovations borrowed from contemporary Greek cities and Near Eastern kingdoms, creating hybrid institutions that proved remarkably effective for managing diverse populations across extensive territories. Archaeological excavations at Lydian administrative centers reveal sophisticated bureaucratic facilities, standardized record-keeping systems, and specialized storage complexes that supported the complex logistics required for governing an expanding territorial state. The Lydian approach to incorporating Arzo-descended populations differed significantly from earlier Hittite imperial policies, emphasizing cultural accommodation and economic integration rather than political subordination and systematic resource extraction. Lydian administrators recognized that the scattered communities throughout Western Anatolia possessed valuable agricultural, craft, and commercial capabilities that could contribute to royal prosperity if properly managed and incentivized. Rather than imposing uniform administrative structures, Lydian governance adapted to local conditions while establishing overarching frameworks for taxation, military service, and judicial proceedings that maintained central authority without disrupting productive local arrangements. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites throughout the Hermes and Meander river valleys reveals significant changes in material culture during the early Lydian period that reflect both political integration and cultural synthesis. Pottery assemblages show the gradual adoption of Lydian decorative motifs and production techniques alongside the continuation of traditional local styles, creating hybrid ceramic traditions that combined elements from multiple cultural sources. Architectural remains demonstrate similar patterns of cultural mixing with traditional Anatolian building techniques adapted to incorporate Lydian architectural elements and spatial arrangements that reflected new social and political relationships. The preservation and transformation of Louisian cultural traditions under Lydian rule created complex processes of cultural negotiation that varied significantly across different communities and social groups. Elite families who had maintained positions of local authority during the Dark Age period often embraced Lydian cultural practices as strategies for accessing new opportunities within the expanding kingdom while preserving elements of traditional identity that distinguished them from purely Lydian aristocratic families. Archaeological evidence from elite residential complexes shows the adoption of Lydian luxury goods, architectural styles, and burial practices alongside the continued use of traditional religious symbols, artistic motifs, and ceremonial objects that maintained connection to Arzawan heritage. Rural communities throughout the former Arzawan territories experienced Lydian integration primarily through economic relationships that gradually transformed agricultural production, craft activities, and local exchange systems. Lydian administrators introduced new crops, farming techniques, and land tenure arrangements that increased agricultural productivity while integrating rural communities into broader commercial networks centered on Lydian urban centers. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements shows the gradual adoption of Lydian pottery styles, metal tools, and household equipment alongside continued use of traditional implements and techniques that proved well adapted to local conditions. The development of Lydian military institutions incorporated traditional Anatolian warfare practices while introducing innovations borrowed from contemporary Greek and Near Eastern military systems. Archaeological evidence from military installations reveals the construction of specialized training facilities, weapons workshops, and storage complexes that supported professional military forces equipped with standardized weapons and armor. The integration of former Altswan military traditions into Lydian forces proceeded through recruitment programs that attracted experienced warriors while providing training in new tactical doctrines and equipment systems that enhanced overall military capabilities. Lydian expansion along the Ion coast brought the kingdom into direct contact with Greek colonial settlements that had been established during the preceding centuries at strategic harbors and river mouths throughout western Anatolia. These Greek communities, primarily founded by settlers from Ionia and Isles, had developed independent political institutions and cultural practices that differed significantly from both traditional Anatolian arrangements and Lydian imperial systems. The resulting interactions created complex zones of cultural contact where Greek, Lydian, and indigenous Anatolian traditions intersected and influenced each other through commercial exchange, intermarriage, and political negotiation. The establishment of Greek colonies along the western Anatolian coast had proceeded gradually during the Dark Age and early Archaic periods as Greek communities sought new agricultural land, commercial opportunities, and strategic positions for maritime trade. Archaeological evidence from colonial sites like Phocia, Smyrna, and Ephesus reveals systematic urban planning, sophisticated harbor installations, and specialized craft quarters that demonstrate the colonists' commitment to establishing permanent settlements rather than temporary trading posts. These communities maintained cultural connections to their mother cities while adapting to local geographical conditions, and developing relationships with indigenous populations that ranged from cooperative to hostile, depending on specific circumstances and competing interests. The interaction between Greek colonists and Asawan-descended communities created opportunities for cultural exchange that influenced both groups while generating new hybrid cultural forms that combined elements from multiple traditions. Archaeological evidence from sites with mixed populations shows the development of distinctive pottery styles, architectural techniques, and artistic motifs that incorporated Greek decorative elements with traditional Anatolian forms and production methods. Religious practices also showed significant mixing, with Greek deities receiving worship alongside traditional Anatolian gods, while ceremonial practices combined elements from different ritual traditions. Lydian policies toward Greek colonial communities reflected sophisticated understanding of the economic and political benefits that could be derived from cooperation rather than conquest. Rather than attempting to impose direct administrative control over well-fortified and economically valuable Greek cities, Lydian rulers developed tributary relationships that preserved Greek political autonomy while ensuring Lydian access to maritime trade networks and specialized Greek products. Archaeological evidence from Lydian administrative centers includes Greek pottery, metalwork, and luxury goods that demonstrate extensive commercial relationships between the kingdom and coastal Greek communities. The transformation of ancient settlements into Greco-Lolian urban centers proceeded through complex processes of population mixing, architectural modification, and institutional adaptation that created distinctive urban environments combining elements from multiple cultural traditions. Sites like Sardis underwent extensive urban renewal during this period, with new construction projects that incorporated Greek architectural elements alongside traditional Lydian and Anatolian building techniques. Public spaces were redesigned to accommodate both traditional Lydian ceremonial activities and Greek-style civic gatherings, while residential areas showed increasing social stratification that reflected the complex ethnic and cultural hierarchies of the mixed urban population. The development of new urban foundations during the Lydian period reflected royal policies designed to consolidate territorial control while promoting economic development and cultural integration. Archaeological surveys have identified numerous planned settlements established during this period at strategic locations that controlled trade routes, agricultural regions, and mineral resources. These new cities featured standardized urban layouts, coordinated infrastructure systems, and specialized districts for different economic activities that demonstrate sophisticated urban planning capabilities and substantial investment in territorial development. Commercial networks that developed under Lydian rule connected western terrain communities to trade systems spanning the eastern Mediterranean and extending into the Black Sea region in Central Asia. Archaeological evidence reveals the circulation of goods from diverse sources, including Greek pottery and metalwork, Phoenician luxury items, Central Asian textiles, and Egyptian decorative objects that demonstrate the extensive reach of Lydian commercial relationships. The kingdom's position enabled it to serve as a crucial intermediary between different cultural and economic zones, while developing specialized industries that produced goods for export to distant markets. The introduction of coinage under Lydian rule represented one of the most significant economic innovations of the ancient world and profoundly influenced commercial practices throughout western Anatolia and beyond. Archaeological evidence from Lydian mints reveals sophisticated techniques for producing standardized gold and silver coins that facilitated commercial transactions, while providing royal authorities with new mechanisms for controlling monetary systems and extracting resources from commercial activities. The adoption of coinage by Greek communities and other trading partners created integrated monetary systems that enhanced commercial efficiency while spreading Lydian political and cultural influence throughout the region. Religious developments during the Lydian period reflected complex processes of theological synthesis that combined traditional Anatolian spiritual practices with Greek religious concepts and Lydian royal ideologies. Temple complexes throughout the kingdom underwent extensive modifications that incorporated architectural elements and ceremonial arrangements from multiple cultural traditions, while maintaining connections to traditional sacred sites and ritual practices. The Great Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, though later rebuilt in purely Greek style, originated during this period as a synthesis of Anatolian goddess worship, Greek religious architecture, and Lydian royal patronage that created one of the most significant religious centers in the ancient world. Artistic developments during the Lydian period produced distinctive cultural achievements that combined traditional Anatolian craft techniques with Greek aesthetic principles and Lydian royal patronage systems. Archaeological evidence from workshops and artistic centers reveals the production of luxury goods, including decorated metalwork, carved gems, and elaborate textiles that incorporated motifs and techniques from multiple cultural sources. These artistic innovations influenced contemporary Greek art while preserving and transforming traditional Anatolian artistic traditions that had survived from the Bronze Age through the Dark Age period. The development of literary and intellectual culture under Lydian rule created new opportunities for cultural expression and knowledge preservation that brought together scholars, poets, and religious thinkers from diverse backgrounds. Archaeological evidence suggests the existence of libraries, schools, and intellectual centers that supported the preservation and transmission of traditional knowledge while encouraging innovation and cultural synthesis. The famous Lydian philosopher and political theorist Alcmaeon, though known primarily through later Greek sources, represents the kind of intellectual achievement that became possible through the cultural mixing and royal patronage that characterized the Lydian period. Educational systems that developed during this period reflected the kingdom's multicultural character and the practical needs of governing diverse populations with different languages, customs, and legal traditions. Archaeological evidence from urban centers suggests the existence of schools that provided instruction in multiple languages, including Lydian, Greek, and Luwian, while teaching practical skills necessary for administrative, commercial, and craft activities. These educational institutions played crucial roles in creating shared cultural frameworks that enabled effective communication and cooperation between different ethnic and cultural groups within the kingdom. Legal systems under Lydian rule adapted traditional Anatolian legal practices to accommodate the diverse populations and complex commercial relationships that characterized the expanding kingdom. Archaeological evidence includes legal documents written in multiple languages and scripts that demonstrate sophisticated approaches to resolving disputes between parties from different cultural backgrounds. These legal innovations influenced subsequent Greek and Persian legal developments while preserving important elements of traditional Anatolian jurisprudence that had evolved over centuries of political and cultural change. The integration of traditional Azaran agricultural and craft knowledge into Lydian economic systems created synergies that enhanced productivity while preserving valuable technical capabilities that might otherwise have been lost. Archaeological evidence from agricultural sites reveals the continued use of traditional farming techniques alongside the introduction of new crops and methods that increased overall productivity. Craft production centers show similar patterns of innovation within traditional frameworks, with traditional Anatolian techniques adapted to produce goods that met the demands of expanded markets while maintaining quality standards and aesthetic principles that distinguished regional products. The gradual Hellenization of cultural practices throughout Western and Anatolia during the later Lydian period reflected increasing Greek influence that operated through commercial relationships, intermarriage, and cultural prestige rather than political conquest. Archaeological evidence shows the progressive adoption of Greek pottery styles, architectural elements, and artistic motifs by communities throughout the former Arzawan territories, while traditional practices continued in modified forms that incorporated Greek elements. This cultural transformation proceeded at different rates in different locations, with coastal areas showing more rapid Hellenization than inland communities that maintained stronger connections to traditional practices. Military developments during the later Lydian period incorporated Greek tactical innovations and equipment while preserving traditional Anatolian military capabilities that proved effective in local geographical conditions. Archaeological evidence from military sites reveals the adoption of Greek hoplite armor and weapons alongside continued use of traditional Anatolian cavalry tactics and siege techniques. The resulting military system combined the best elements from multiple traditions while adapting to the specific strategic challenges faced by a territorial kingdom that needed to defend extensive frontiers against diverse enemies. The final siege of Sardis in 546 BC marked not merely the end of Lydian independence, but the beginning of a profound transformation that would reshape the cultural, administrative, and economic foundations of Western and New World. For the next 2 centuries, Cyrus the Great's methodical conquest of Croesus' kingdom proceeded with a calculated precision that had characterized Persian expansion throughout the Near East. Yet the integration of former Arzawa territories into the Amanid Empire required administrative innovations that acknowledged the region's complex ethnic composition, sophisticated urban centers, and established commercial networks that connected Anatolia to markets spanning from the Black Sea to the eastern Mediterranean. The Persian administrative apparatus that emerged in western Anatolia represented a careful synthesis of imperial standardization with regional accommodation that reflected aid understanding of effective governance over diverse populations. Archaeological evidence from Sardis reveals extensive modifications to the former Lydian administrative complex with new construction that incorporated Persian architectural elements alongside preserved Lydian structures that continued serving governmental functions. The resulting administrative center featured audience halls designed according to Persian ceremonial protocols, record-keeping facilities adapted to Achaemenid bureaucratic procedures, and residential quarters for Persian officials that maintained appropriate status distinctions while facilitating interaction with local administrative personnel. The establishment of the Lydian satrapy under Tabales, one of Cyrus's trusted commanders, initiated systematic reorganization of territorial administration that divided the former kingdom into manageable districts while preserving local governance structures that had proven effective during the Lydian period. Persian administrators recognized that the complex urban hierarchies, rural administrative networks, and commercial relationships that had developed under Lydian rule represented valuable assets that could serve imperial interests if properly managed rather than disrupted through wholesale replacement. Archaeological surveys throughout the Hermas and Mayanda Vales reveal continued occupation of traditional administrative centers with evidence of gradual modification rather than abandonment and replacement that might have accompanied more disruptive conquest policies. The Persian approach to managing the Greek cities along the Anatolian coast demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the political and economic benefits that could be derived from maintaining established urban institutions while ensuring imperial control over strategic resources and military capabilities. Rather than imposing uniform administrative structures that might have provoked costly rebellions, Persian officials developed flexible arrangements that preserved Greek civic institutions while establishing oversight mechanisms that prevented independent foreign policy initiatives or military preparations that might threaten imperial interests. Archaeological evidence from cities like Ephesus and Mytus shows continued Greek architectural projects and civic construction alongside the establishment of Persian administrative facilities that monitored local activities without disrupting productive urban functions. The transformation of religious practices under Persian rule created complex processes of theological accommodation that reflected Achaemenid policies of religious tolerance combined with imperial requirements for demonstrating loyalty to Persian authority. Traditional Anatolian religious sites throughout the former Arzawa territories continued receiving worship and ritual offerings, but archaeological evidence reveals modifications to ceremonial practices that incorporated acknowledgement of Persian royal authority and Zoroastrian religious concepts. Temple complexes underwent architectural modifications that added Persian ceremonial spaces while preserving traditional sanctuary areas, creating religious environments that served both local spiritual needs and imperial political requirements. The Great Temple of Artemis at Ephesus exemplified the complex religious negotiations that characterized this period as Greek, Anatolian, and Persian religious traditions intersected within one of the ancient world's most significant sacred sites. Archaeological excavations reveal construction projects during the Persian period that expanded temple facilities while incorporating architectural elements that reflected Persian royal patronage and Zoroastrian symbolic motifs. Votive deposits from this period include offerings that combine traditional Greek and Anatolian religious objects with items reflecting Persian cultural influences, demonstrating the complex religious synthesis that emerged under imperial rule. The introduction of Zoroastrian religious concepts into Western Anatolian spiritual practices proceeded gradually through Persian administrative personnel, military garrisons, and commercial communities rather than through systematic missionary activities or forced conversion programs. Archaeological evidence from Persian residential quarters and administrative centers includes fire altars, ritual vessels, and ceremonial objects associated with Zoroastrian worship that demonstrate the maintenance of Persian religious practices within multicultural urban environments. The influence of Zoroastrian theological concepts appears in modified local religious practices that incorporated dualistic spiritual concepts and ethical teachings while preserving traditional ceremonial forms and community religious functions. The Persian administrative system's emphasis on efficient resource extraction and territorial control required detailed knowledge of local economic capabilities, population distributions, and productive resources that could support imperial military operations and administrative expenses. Archaeological evidence from Persian administrative centers includes extensive record-keeping facilities with standardized storage systems for documents, tablets, and scrolls that recorded taxation assessments, population censuses, and resource inventories throughout the satrapy. These administrative innovations created systematic information gathering capabilities that enabled more effective governance while providing imperial authorities with detailed knowledge of regional conditions and capabilities. The development of new transportation infrastructure under Persian rule reflected imperial requirements for rapid communication and military movement across the extensive territories of Western Anatolia while supporting expanded commercial activities that generated revenue for imperial administration. Archaeological surveys have identified substantial road construction projects that improved existing routes while establishing new connections between administrative centers, military installations, and commercial hubs. The famous Royal Road that connected Sardis to the imperial capital at Pepololis required extensive engineering work through the mountainous terrain of central Anatolia with evidence of bridges, way stations, and maintenance facilities that supported regular courier services and military movements. Commercial developments under Persian rule created unprecedented opportunities for long-distance trade that connected Western Anatolian producers to markets throughout the vast Amanid Empire while introducing new products, techniques, and commercial practices that enhanced local economic capabilities. Archaeological evidence from commercial centers reveals expanded warehouse facilities, specialized craft, and improved harbor installations that supported increased trade volumes and more diverse commercial relationships. The Persian Empire's standardized coinage system facilitated commercial transactions across vast distances while providing stable monetary standards that reduced transaction costs and commercial risks. The integration of traditional Anatolian craft production into imperial commercial networks created new markets for regional specialties while introducing Persian aesthetic preferences and technical innovations that influenced local production methods. Archaeological evidence from craft workshops reveals the continued production of traditional pottery, textiles, and metalwork alongside new products that incorporated Persian decorative motifs and production techniques. Textile production, which had been a significant economic activity throughout the region's history, expanded significantly under Persian rule as imperial demand for high-quality fabrics created profitable export opportunities for skilled local producers. Agricultural innovations introduced during the Persian period enhanced productivity, while adapting traditional farming practices to serve imperial administrative requirements and expanded commercial opportunities. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements reveals the introduction of new irrigation techniques, crop varieties, and land management practices that increased yields while maintaining soil fertility over extended periods. Persian administrators promoted agricultural improvements that supported growing urban populations, while generating surplus production for taxation and commercial export that contributed to imperial revenues and regional prosperity. The Persian military system's incorporation of local military traditions and personnel created hybrid forces that combined imperial standardization with regional tactical knowledge and geographical expertise. Archaeological evidence from military installations reveals weapons, workshops, training facilities, and garrison quarters that supported mixed units, including Persian regulars, local auxiliaries, and specialized forces recruited from different ethnic communities within the satrapy. These military arrangements provided effective defense against external threats while maintaining internal security through forces that understood local conditions and possessed established relationships with regional populations. The gradual Persianization of elite culture throughout Western Anatolia proceeded through adoption of Persian court customs, artistic styles, and social practices that demonstrated loyalty to imperial authority while providing access to opportunities within the broader Persian administrative and commercial systems. Archaeological evidence from elite residential complexes reveals the adoption of Persian architectural elements, decorative arts, and luxury goods alongside continued use of traditional local status symbols and cultural markers. These cultural adaptations created distinctive hybrid elite cultures that maintained regional identity while participating effectively in imperial political and social networks. Educational developments under Persian rule created new opportunities for cultural and intellectual exchange that brought together scholars, administrators, and religious thinkers from diverse backgrounds throughout the empire. Archaeological evidence suggests the establishment of schools and intellectual centers that provided training in multiple languages, administrative techniques, and cultural traditions necessary for effective participation in imperial governance and commercial activities. These educational institutions played crucial roles in preserving traditional knowledge while facilitating cultural exchange and innovation that enriched both local and imperial intellectual traditions. Legal systems under Persian administration adapted traditional local legal practices to conform with imperial legal principles, while preserving community-based dispute resolution mechanisms that had proven effective for managing local affairs. Archaeological evidence includes legal documents that demonstrate sophisticated approaches to resolving disputes between parties from different cultural and legal traditions while maintaining consistency with imperial legal standards. These legal innovations created frameworks for managing complex multicultural societies while preserving valuable elements of traditional jurisprudence that had evolved over centuries of political development. The development of Persian period urban planning reflected imperial preferences for orderly, defensible cities that could serve administrative functions while supporting commercial activities and providing appropriate settings for imperial ceremonial requirements. Archaeological excavations at major centers revealed systematic urban renewal projects that improved infrastructure, enhanced defensive capabilities, and created public spaces suitable for imperial administrative and ceremonial functions. These urban improvements enhanced quality of life for local populations while creating environments that effectively served imperial political and economic interests. Cultural synthesis under Persian rule produced distinctive artistic and intellectual achievements that combined traditional Anatolian creative traditions with Persian aesthetic principles and techniques from other regions of the empire. Archaeological evidence from workshops and artistic centers reveals the production of luxury goods, architectural decorations, and ceremonial objects that incorporated motifs and techniques from multiple cultural sources while maintaining recognizable regional characteristics. These artistic innovations influenced contemporary developments throughout the Persian Empire while preserving and transforming traditional Anatolian cultural expressions. The Persian period's impact on language use and literary development created complex multilingual environments where Persian administrative language coexisted with Greek commercial and intellectual discourse alongside continued use of traditional Anatolian languages for local community functions. Archaeological evidence includes inscriptions in multiple languages and scripts that demonstrate the practical multilingualism required for effective participation in imperial society while preserving traditional cultural identities. These linguistic developments influenced subsequent cultural evolution while maintaining connections to historical traditions that provided continuity across political transitions. Economic prosperity under Persian rule reached levels that exceeded previous achievements during the Lydian period as imperial peace standardized. Commercial practices and access to vast markets created unprecedented opportunities for regional producers and merchants. Archaeological evidence reveals expanded urban centers, improved rural settlements, and sophisticated infrastructure projects that supported growing populations and increased economic activity. The combination of imperial stability, efficient administration, and cultural tolerance created conditions that enabled traditional Anatolian communities to prosper while adapting to new political and economic circumstances. The Persian administrative system's success in Western Anatolia demonstrated the effectiveness of imperial policies that balanced central control with regional autonomy while promoting economic development and cultural accommodation. Archaeological evidence from the final decades of Persian rule reveals continued prosperity, cultural vitality, and political stability that provided foundations for subsequent historical developments while preserving essential elements of traditional Anatolian civilization that had evolved over more than a millennium of political and cultural change. Alexander the Great's crossing of the Hellespont in 334 BC marked the beginning of the final chapter in the dissolution of the distinct Arzawa cultural identity as Macedonian conquest brought new administrative systems, settlement patterns and cultural influences that would complete the transformation begun under Persian rule. The Battle of the Granicus fought within the ancient heartland of Arzawa territory demonstrated the military obsolescence of traditional Anatolian defensive strategies against Macedonian tactical innovations, while the subsequent establishment of Hellenistic kingdoms throughout Western Anatolia created political frameworks that systematically replaced remaining Persian-era accommodations for local cultural practices with standardized Greek institutional arrangements. Archaeological evidence from major centers like Sardis reveals extensive urban reconstruction projects initiated immediately following Alexander's conquest, with Macedonian engineers implementing grid-patterned street systems, standardized building codes, and centralized water distribution networks that reflected Greek urban planning principles rather than the organic development patterns that had characterized Anatolian cities for millennia. The systematic demolition of Persian administrative buildings and their replacement with Greek-style civic structures eliminated physical reminders of previous political arrangements while creating urban environments that promoted Greek cultural practices and social organization. The establishment of veteran settlements throughout Western and Anatolia under Alexander's successors accelerated cultural transformation through the introduction of substantial Greek-speaking populations who received land grants in territories previously occupied by communities maintaining cultural traditions. Archaeological surveys in the Hermes and Manda valleys reveal numerous new settlements founded during the early Hellenistic period with distinctly Greek material culture, architectural styles, and urban planning that contrasted sharply with traditional Anatolian settlement patterns. These colonial foundations created Greek cultural enclaves that gradually expanded their influence over surrounding territories through intermarriage, commercial relationships, and administrative integration. The Suzid administrative system that emerged in Western Anatolia during the 3rd century BC implemented systematic Hellenization policies that eliminated remaining Persian-era accommodations for local cultural practices while promoting Greek educational institutions, religious observances and legal procedures throughout the region. Archaeological evidence from administrative centers reveals the replacement of multilingual record-keeping systems with standardized Greek documentation, the conversion of traditional religious sites to Greek cult practices, and the establishment of Greek-style gymnasia and theaters that served as centers for cultural assimilation rather than mere entertainment venues. The gradual disappearance of Luwizian language use in public context during the Hellenistic period can be traced through epigraphic evidence that shows the progressive replacement of traditional Anatolian scripts and vocabulary with Greek equivalents in official documents, commercial contracts, and religious dedications. The latest securely dated Luwizian inscriptions from Western Anatolia appeared during the early 3rd century BC, suggesting that the language survived in private contexts for several generations after its elimination from public use. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements indicates that traditional cultural practices persisted longer in isolated communities, but these enclaves gradually succumbed to economic and social pressures that favored participation in Greek-dominated urban networks. The Roman conquest of Western Anatolia during the 2nd and 1st centuries BC completed the political transformation begun under Hellenistic rule while introducing new administrative efficiency and cultural standardization that eliminated the last vestiges of distinct regional identity. Roman provincial administration in Asia Minor implemented systematic census procedures, taxation systems, and legal frameworks that treated all inhabitants as subjects of a unified imperial system, regardless of ethnic background or cultural heritage. Archaeological evidence from Roman administrative centers reveals the construction of standardized governmental buildings, military installations, and infrastructure projects that reflected imperial architectural styles and functional requirements rather than local traditions or preferences. Roman urban planning projects transformed existing cities throughout Western Anatolia according to imperial standards that emphasize functionality, monumentality, and symbolic representation of Roman authority, rather than accommodation of local cultural practices or historical continuity. The reconstruction of Ephesus during the early imperial period exemplifies this transformation with massive construction projects that created a thoroughly Roman urban environment featuring standardized public buildings, residential districts, organized according to social hierarchy, and commercial facilities designed to serve imperial economic interests. Our archaeological excavations reveal that these construction projects often involve the deliberate destruction of earlier buildings that might have preserved connections to pre-Roman cultural traditions. The integration of Western and Anatolian populations into Roman military service accelerated cultural assimilation through recruitment policies that removed young men from local communities for extended periods of service in distant provinces where they acquired Roman cultural practices, Latin language, skills, and loyalty to imperial institutions rather than regional traditions. Military diplomas and tombstone inscriptions from the imperial period document the careers of numerous soldiers from Western Anatolian communities who served throughout the empire and often retired to veteran colonies far from their places of origin, breaking generational continuity that might have preserved traditional cultural knowledge. Despite systematic political and cultural transformation, elements of our Gawan heritage survived in modified forms that influenced the development of regional culture throughout the Roman and Byzantine periods. Place names throughout Western Anatolia preserve linguistic elements derived from ancient Luwian vocabulary, with modern toponyms like Tales, Nisa, and Magnesia containing recognizable components of pre-Greek Anatolian languages that survived centuries of linguistic change and political transformation. Systematic analysis of these toponymic survivals reveals patterns of linguistic continuity that provide valuable evidence for reconstructing ancient settlement patterns and cultural boundaries that are otherwise poorly documented in historical sources. Religious practices in rural areas of Western Anatolia maintained connections to ancient Anatolian spiritual traditions through syncretistic processes that incorporated traditional ceremonial elements into Greek and Roman religious frameworks. Archaeological evidence from sanctuary sites throughout the region reveals continuous ritual activity spanning from the Bronze Age through the Roman period, with votive offerings and ceremonial deposits that demonstrate evolving but persistent religious practices adapted to changing political and cultural circumstances. The cult of the Anatolian mother goddess, though eventually identified with Greek Cybele and Roman Machnomata, preserved essential elements of Bronze Age fertility religion that had been central to Arzawan's spiritual life. The survival of traditional craft techniques in pottery production, metalworking, and textile manufacture created continuities in material culture that connected Roman period communities to their ancient heritage despite political and linguistic transformation. Archaeological analysis of pottery assemblages from rural settlements reveals production techniques, decorative motifs, and vessel forms that maintained recognizable connections to Bronze Age Anatolian traditions while adapting to changing functional requirements and aesthetic preferences. These craft continuities suggest that practical knowledge and cultural skills passed through family networks and community traditions that preserved essential elements of ancient technical expertise across political transitions. Agricultural practices throughout Western Anatolia during the Roman period incorporated traditional Anatolian farming techniques alongside imperial innovations, creating hybrid systems that maximize productivity while preserving knowledge of local environmental conditions and crop varieties that had been developed over millennia of agricultural experimentation. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements reveals continued use of traditional irrigation methods, terracing systems, and crop rotation practices that had proven effective in local geographical conditions. While Roman agricultural writers like Camilla acknowledged the superiority of certain Anatolian farming techniques and recommended their adoption throughout the empire, the rediscovery of Arzawan civilization began during the 19th century as European archaeological expeditions to Anatolia encountered massive ruins, mysterious inscriptions, and distinctive artifact assemblages that clearly predated Greek and Roman occupation but could not be attributed to any known historical civilization. Early excavations at sites like Sardis and Ephesus revealed construction techniques, architectural styles, and decorative arts that demonstrated sophisticated urban civilization during periods when ancient literary sources provided little information about Anatolian political and cultural development. These initial discoveries generated scholarly interest in exploring the prehistoric and protohistoric periods of Anatolian civilization that had been overshadowed by focus on classical Greek and Roman achievements. The decipherment of Hittite cuneiform texts during the early 20th century provided the first concrete historical evidence for the existence of Arzawa as a major Bronze Age kingdom, with diplomatic correspondence and military records that documented extensive political relationships between Arzawan rulers and other major powers of the ancient Near East. The Amarna letters discovered in Egypt and containing correspondence between Arzawan kings and Egyptian pharaohs demonstrated that Arzawa had been recognized as an independent power capable of conducting international diplomacy on equal terms with the great empires of the late Bronze Age. These textual discoveries transformed scholarly understanding of Bronze Age Anatolian political complexity while providing historical context for archaeological discoveries throughout Western Anatolia. Systematic archaeological investigation of Bronze Age sites throughout Western and Anatolia during the 20th century revealed the extent and sophistication of Arzawan civilization through excavations at major centers like Bisaltan, Aphrodisia, and Troy. These excavations uncovered palace complexes, administrative archives, fortification systems, and residential districts that demonstrated urban planning capabilities, architectural sophistication, and material prosperity comparable to contemporary civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt. The discovery of extensive Bronze Age settlement networks throughout the Hermes and Mayanda valleys revealed that Arzawan political control had extended across substantial territories with integrated administrative systems and coordinated defensive arrangements. The development of new archaeological techniques during the late 20th and early 21st centuries enabled more sophisticated analysis of Arzawan material culture and settlement patterns through methods like remote sensing, chemical analysis, and environmental reconstruction that provided detailed information about ancient economic activities, trade relationships, and environmental conditions. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar revealed extensive buried structures at known sites while identifying previously unknown settlements that expanded understanding of Arzawan territorial extent and population density. Chemical analysis of pottery, metals, and other artifacts provided evidence for trade networks, production techniques, and resource exploitation patterns that demonstrated the complexity of Bronze Age Anatolian economic systems. Linguistic analysis of Luwian hieroglyphic inscriptions discovered throughout Anatolia and Syria provided crucial evidence for understanding Arzawan language, religious practices, and political institutions that supplemented archaeological evidence with direct testimony from ancient sources. The gradual decipherment of Luwian hieroglyphic texts revealed that this writing system had been used throughout much of Anatolia during the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, with inscriptions that documented royal genealogies, religious ceremonies, and administrative procedures that provided insights into Arzawan political and cultural organization. These linguistic discoveries demonstrated the widespread influence of Luwian-speaking peoples throughout Anatolia, while revealing connections between different regional kingdoms that had shared cultural and political traditions. Contemporary scholarly debates about Arzawan civilization focused on fundamental questions about political organization, cultural identity, and historical significance that reflect broader discussions about Bronze Age state formation, cultural interaction, and imperial expansion in the ancient Near East. Some scholars emphasize Arzawan political independence and cultural distinctiveness, arguing that the kingdom represented a unique Anatolian political tradition that differed significantly from contemporary Near Eastern imperial systems. Others stress the cultural connections and political relationships that linked Arzawa to broader patterns of Bronze Age development throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. The relationship between Arzawan political institutions and broader patterns of Bronze age-state formation remains a subject of active scholarly investigation with ongoing debates about the extent to which AR1 governmental systems reflected indigenous Anatolian political traditions versus adaptation of administrative techniques borrowed from Mesopotamian and Egyptian sources. Archaeological evidence for specialized administrative buildings, record-keeping systems, and bureaucratic procedures suggests sophisticated governmental capabilities, but the specific organizational principles and institutional arrangements that governed Arzawan political life remain poorly understood due to limited textual evidence and the fragmentary nature of administrative archives. Questions about Arzawan cultural identity and ethnic composition reflect broader scholarly discussions about the nature of Bronze Age political entities and the relationship between political organization and cultural identity in ancient societies. The extent to which Arzawan political unity reflected shared ethnic identity, cultural traditions, and linguistic practices remains uncertain, with archaeological evidence suggesting considerable cultural diversity within territories that acknowledged Arzawan political authority. These debates have important implications for understanding ancient concepts of political legitimacy, territorial control, and cultural integration in complex Bronze Age societies. The significance of Arzawan civilization for understanding Bronze Age Anatolian history and Indo-European cultural development continues to generate scholarly interest and debate as new archaeological discoveries and analytical techniques provide additional evidence for evaluating competing interpretations of ancient Anatolian political and cultural development. Recent excavations at sites throughout Western Anatolia have revealed evidence for sophisticated urban planning, advanced metallurgical techniques, and extensive trade networks that demonstrate the complexity and prosperity of Bronze Age Anatolian civilization. These discoveries have important implications for understanding the broader historical context of Indo-European expansion, the development of complex societies in Anatolia, and the cultural interactions that shaped ancient Near Eastern civilization. The legacy of Arzawan civilization extends beyond its immediate historical significance to encompass broader questions about cultural continuity, political transformation, and the preservation of historical memory across extended periods of political change and cultural adaptation. The survival of Arzawan cultural elements through successive periods of foreign rule demonstrates the resilience of local traditions and the complex processes through which cultural knowledge is preserved, modified, and transmitted across generations. These patterns of cultural continuity and transformation provide valuable insights into the relationship between political power and cultural identity that remain relevant for understanding historical processes in many different contexts. Modern archaeological research continues to reveal new aspects of Arzawan civilization while contributing to broader understanding of Bronze Age Anatolian history and its significance for world history. This kingdom of Arzawa represents one of the most important examples of Bronze Age political and cultural development outside the traditional centers of ancient Near Eastern civilization, demonstrating that sophisticated urban societies, complex political institutions, and advanced cultural achievements developed independently in diverse geographical and cultural contexts throughout the ancient world. The rediscovery and ongoing investigation of Arzawan civilization continues to enrich our understanding of ancient history while providing valuable perspectives on the diversity and complexity of human cultural achievement in the Bronze Age world.